Tony, lower part of the North Island, underwater, you wouldn't believe it.
Oh yeah, to get the sort of rainfall that they've had in such a short space of time, 6 or 7 weeks worth in a couple of days is just unbelievable. And of course, those particular rivers coming out of a lot of that hill country, it just brings with it a whole pile of sediment. So we've got pastures that are covered in silt. They're unpalatable now. We need them to be cleaned up. I mean, there's fence damage. There's all sorts of things that are just going to take a much longer time to repair and get back in order, so that first of all that you can even get stock back on some of those paddocks.
And yet other parts of New Zealand are as dry as a bone.
Yeah, I mean, if you go into North Canterbury, even parts of the eastern Wairarapa still are still relatively dry. North Canterbury in particular is still very dry. And believe it or not, even here in the middle of Canterbury, while we've had some rainfall and some snows and some nice weather and a little bit more rain and then snow again, we desperately need some rainfall recharge. If you look at how the bores, our groundwater bores, have recovered, especially those that are used mostly for irrigation, so we're talking bores that are anything deeper than about 50 metres. All we've had in essence since the irrigation season finished in early April has been a kickback, which is just when everybody turns off. There's an immediate rise of 1.5 metres in water level, and that's about all that's happened in those aquifers since then. So we've had maybe 20 or 30 centimetres of rise, whereas we're looking for a rise of maybe 7 or 8 metres in some of those bores to get us back to what we would consider a relatively safe level, given that the irrigation season's potentially not very far away.
There'd be those who would say that the snow, so we're okay.
That's right. We need, if everybody thinks back to what it was like in March and April and early May in 2014, when there was water everywhere, we need those very large rainfall events, those 70, 80, 90 millimetre rainfall events, and more than one of them in the recharge part of the season. So we need those to have occurred preferably by the end of July. So we've got to nearly July, and even the latest snowfall, where we've got snow up around Methven and up in those in the areas where we're going to get groundwater recharge. Even though you might have 30 centimetres of snow, that's not 30 millimetres of precipitation. That's going to end up draining 300 millimetres, of precipitation that's going to drain into the soil and therefore eventually make its way to the groundwater system.
There must be sort of
Yeah, there's an equivalence. Probably this snow was of the order of maybe 20%, so there might be 50 to 60 millimetres of precipitation that will get into the soil profile. But on a lot of the dryland areas, we've got deficits that are way in excess of that. So if you go into North Canterbury, for example, and some of the places where we've got some measurements, I mean, we've got 100 millimetres of deficit. So before the soil refills itself, before you can then start refilling groundwater.
So that means in the spring?
It means in the spring we're going to have groundwater levels that are lower than what we would really like them to be to kick into the irrigation season. And it has some parallels with sort of like the 2004-2005 period, where we had very low ground levels, suddenly a big demand for irrigation water again in the spring, and they're still predicting a relatively large El Nino event this year, which is hot, dry, norwesterly, warm weather, dry on the east coast, which means that we'll need to use substantially more irrigation water than we might have even used last year. So suddenly some of those bores will almost become self-limiting because water levels will get too low.
I better start singing in the shower, Tony.
You better start singing in the shower and get out there and dance on a full moon.
Funnily enough though, I mean, white parts of Wairarapa at the moment are in bad state because of flooding, but there's a new scheme that's looking good there?
Yes, the Wairarapa Water Users Group they had money from the Acceleration Fund, the Irrigation Acceleration Fund, to investigate potential storage sites. They've sorted out two potential storage sites, and now it's the process of going to the farmers, talking about those potential storage sites, the farmers will then need to start thinking about how much water they need to irrigate whatever irrigable land they've got,
Yep.
and getting themselves organised to buy into that sort of scheme as well.
It'll be a hard mindset because they're underwater and mud at the moment.
Yes, Wairarapa probably to a slightly lesser extent unless you're close to the Ruamahanga or one of those rivers that overflowed its banks. But yep, it's a hard mindset to think about when you've just had a rainfall that's just got everything really wet. But hopefully memories are short. They'll remember what it was like in February, March and April this year.
The other thing, Tony, I guess, is if you get that much now, nature's going to average it out anyway. So
yeah, there's always that thought that, well, we're ahead of the average right now, so averages catch up. So somewhere along the way, somebody's going to miss out, and potentially that's where we're going. That's where we're heading on the East Coast in particular this coming spring.
So briefly, think irrigation, ready for the switch, and hope
Yep.
like mad that there's enough there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and for those in those Wairarapa people that we were just talking about, for the water users, this is a long-term investment for them. They need to start thinking about where they might irrigate and then how much water they're going to use and get behind these schemes.
Water's gold.
It is absolutely gold.